And then this guy, for some reason, I can't explain it other than he had like TikTok ADHD animation. Like he was just like, wait, 1 second, we need to go. It was like liquid and gummy and gooey. And I was actually uncomfortable every single time he was on screen. I couldn't stand it. I actually think there is a masterpiece Pixar film hidden inside Elio. You know, it needs a re-edit, it needs a rewrite, it needs a restructuring. But I will say, I didn't know anything about who made this movie, who wrote this movie, nothing. And when the credits pulled up and there were like two directors, I went, makes sense. All right, guys, I need to talk about Elio, all right? I am someone who grew up on Pixar. I love Pixar's classic movies. I have kind of tuned out of Pixar for the most part. I've been a bunch of Pixar sequels that I just haven't really enjoyed, to be honest. I thought Inside Out 2 was perfectly fine, perfectly serviceable. I think we were all really high on it, but very quickly you realize I'm probably not going to rewatch that anytime soon. And something like Elemental was genuinely kind of bad. So it's been really hard to watch Pixar kind of lose this gold standard they used to have, you know, such an inventive animation studio with like just such clear goals and like well constructed stories kind of turn into sort of start making sort of lesser sort of DreamWorks movies or even Illumination movies. And I saw the trailer for Elio and I was like, this must be a lame DreamWorks movie. This must be like an Illumination movie. And then the Pixar logo popped up at the end. I couldn't believe it. But then cynical reviewers, far more harsh than myself, were giving this fantastic reviews, talking about how it's this great meditation on grief and feeling alone and growing up in a world that doesn't make you feel like you're at home. And I was like, wow, this sounds really, really fascinating to me. So I got a ticket. I went and saw it. I was like, at the very least, it'll be interesting. I'll have things to talk about. And boy, do I have things to talk about. Now, if you are a parent and you want to take your kids to a family movie, this does the job. All right. This is much more artfully crafted than, say, like the Smurfs movie coming out. All right. This is a solid family film. But is this as good as classic Pixar? Does it work for adults just as much as it works for kids? Not really, but it almost does. That's my big thing here. I think Elio is bursting at the seams with creativity, fantastic story potential, really interesting ideas, and there's about 5 movies worth of story material here, and somehow they try and pull all of it off. Does that make sense? Every 20, 30 minutes, there was a story idea where I was like, oh, that's really interesting. That could have been its own movie. And then it'll go somewhere else. And I'll be like, that could have been its own movie. But as it stands, it kind of like scratches all of them just a bit and doesn't fully flesh any of them out. There's so many great ideas here. So I'm just going to have to get into it, right? The basic setup here is that Elio, a young child, has lost both his parents. This happens before the movie starts, right? And he is now living with his auntie. And he feels very alone in this world, all right? Like he doesn't connect with his auntie properly. He gets bullied at school and he misses his parents. So eventually he kind of starts feeling out of place in this world and he looks to the stars, right? He gets this fascination with space and he thinks that is where his answer is. You know, that's where he can truly be himself, out up in the stars. A really promising start. I was really into the movie at this point. I was like, wow, what a great idea. On top of that, this movie reminds me of so many classic science fiction movies and modern science fiction movies as well. So at this point, I was getting shades of like the Neil Armstrong movie, right? The Ryan Gosling, director of La La Land, Damien Chazelle movie, First Man, where the whole plot around there is that he kind of wants to leave Earth to escape his problems back at home and he prefers the loneliness of space. So I was like, okay, I'm going to let Pixar cook. And very quickly, they let me down, all right? Because once he finally, obviously he gets into space, right? That's most of the movie is following him on his space adventures when aliens finally abduct him because he's begging aliens to abduct him. We get multiple montages of him looking to the stars and creating little messages in the sand, hoping aliens come get him. And they do. So eventually the aliens abduct him. And this is where the movie starts to fall apart for me. It went from really interesting, dramatic story potential. I couldn't wait for this meditation on grief and loneliness. And once we're in space, it becomes like a really dull, boring Futurama episode. You know, Futurama works because it's satire and it's got adult humor and it's taking really kind of far out left field science fiction concepts and recontextualizing it for an adult audience. But I personally do not think kids are very interested in watching someone try and essentially represent Earth at basically the interstellar United Nations, because that's what happens. He gets called up and he gets chosen to be the human representative amongst all the other planets, I guess. And at this point, I was really kind of struggling. I was like, this is exactly what I worried this movie was going to be from the trailer. I was kind of like, this isn't super interesting. This isn't super funny. It's just a bunch of strange visuals, and not strange in a fascinating way, just kind of like, you kind of just seen there. You're like witnessing the movie, you're watching the movie unfold, and you're just like, oh, all these ideas I was interested in, just to kind of watch him go on quests to prove that he can bring peace to the United Nations of the universe, right? And I wasn't really enjoying it. There were some really cool character designs, but for the most part, I didn't enjoy. At this point, I was turning on the movie. I didn't love how the human character models looked. I wasn't particularly impressed with anything going on in space. But then, as the movie progresses through this admittedly clunky plot, we start getting all these interesting ideas that could have been their own movies. So I'm going to get into light spoilers here, all right? Not full spoilers. This won't ruin the movie, just light spoilers for now. And I'll let you know when I'm getting into full spoilers. But at a certain point, because he's up in space, right, they need to figure out a solution for what's going to go down back at Earth, right? Because everyone will be looking for him. So they create a clone and send it down to Earth. And at this point, my ears pricked up and I went, I'm willing to forgive this dull setup, right, with the whole like United Nations of the universe, if they pull this off and really explore this, because I could see where it was going. So they send a clone of Elio down, and the clone starts getting along with the auntie that he lives with way better. And I was like, oh my God, they are about to create a genuine classic science fiction movie. What an interesting idea. What a fantastic idea. And he has to sit there in space and watch as this imposter gets along better with his auntie than he did. I'm like, this could be the whole movie. This could be the whole movie. I was so wrapped in this idea. And unfortunately, they kind of disregard this very, very quickly. Earth-shattering for me, because I was so excited. I was like, this is weird. This is strange. This isn't just Pixar doing the same thing they always do lately. This is like a really out there idea that I think kids are going to enjoy, and I'm really, really enjoying. And it gives shades of Annihilation by Alex Garland, like the horror of a clone replacing you. I was like, this is incredible. But yeah, they quickly drop that. So now we are going to have to get into full spoiler talk so I can really get into the weeds of where, in my opinion, this movie kind of falls apart. But the big issue I have with this movie is so many promising ideas. I love so much of what I'm seeing, but it just doesn't hold together. So, spoiler talk. 3, 2, 1. All right, so once we get to this clone subplot that I was really enjoying, I was like, where's this going to go? And then it subverts my expectations in a really fascinating way. You're watching the auntie get along with the clone of Elio, and I'm like, this is really, really fun. This is really, really exciting. Where's this going to go? You know, how's this problem going to be solved? And then they surprise us when the auntie actually has clued on to the fact that this is a clone, and she's pretending to be really happy. And this is a sweet moment. This is a really sweet moment, right? Because now we're realizing that up in space, Elio is having his biggest fear validated, right? That he didn't belong on Earth, right? So therefore he should stay in space. Whereas in reality, the auntie is actually, you know, kind of like keeping her cards close to her chest and, you know, and trying to outsmart this imposter. So then we have this great section. I don't know where this came from, right? Where she gets a hold of a piece of hair of the Elio clone. And this piece of hair comes to life while she's trying to examine it, and goes back up to the clone body just to reconnect with the clone. And then the clone says, hey, I think we should talk. Incredible moment. And this leads to a genuinely brilliant moment in the movie, right? Where she's on the beach, right? The auntie is on the beach looking to the stars, trying to basically request the real Elio to come back home. But the real Elio is actually already back home and he's on the beach. So he sees his mum looking up to the stars and thinks this is just a moment where she's getting along and having a bonding moment with the clone of Elio, which she never really did with the real Elio, right? She never really got on his level with the whole space thing. So he's still sitting there in this moment being like, oh my God, my auntie gets along with the clone better. But she's actually trying to get Elio back. It's super fascinating. And then you have this moment where she sees the boy, she sees Elio, the real Elio on the beach, and thinks it's the clone Elio. He sees his auntie, but thinks she has different intentions. And they're both looking at each other, trying to understand each other. And you're sitting there as an audience member being like, oh my God, he doesn't know that she knows this. She doesn't know that he knows this. They don't know what their true intentions are. It's brilliant writing. And not even just for a kids movie, for an adult movie, it's brilliant writing. I was like, this is really great material. Why isn't this the whole movie? And the reason this isn't the whole movie is because instead we focus on these Mickey 17 style, like, creeper creatures. All right, there's this random creature that Elio befriends, which incredible character design. It does feel like it's directly copying Mickey 17's design of the creepers, if you've seen that movie. But incredible character design. I love how much it can emote without any like facial features, right? So there's this young boy worm that Elio is hanging around with and makes friends with. And that's fine. I actually really like that too, and we'll get to that. But the big issue I had with this movie is not only the kind of like universe, United Nations thing, but it's this villain. All right. And there is a great payoff with the villain, but watching these scenes where the villain is like, I'm going to stop you, Elio. I'm going to hunt down this in the universe. And it just wasn't landing. Like, I have no other way to explain it than it was just the most dull stuff in the movie. And Elio being like, I can fight this bad guy, just wasn't fun, wasn't interesting. It was giving Shark Tale, like just a really lame plot where you're like, okay, can we move on? And the reason I say this is there's so much time spent with these dull scenes with the villain, right? This dad of the worm creature that Elio befriends, and it just completely bogs down the movie. And I don't know how to fix the movie. Like, I'm being honest, because there's so much stuff I love, and then so many moments where I'm like, what are we doing? All right, so for a while, it's just this mediocre space adventure where Elio is going around all these different kind of sections of space with this worm creature. And then I realized I know it's a shame because the potential here is that Elio wants to be in space. Right? Elio wants to go to space because he doesn't want to be at home where his parents died. But I do think the movie would have been better if instead his worm friend crash landed on Earth. I know it's a bit simple, but I genuinely think what the movie should have been is the worm creature crash lands on Earth, right? Elio doesn't get abducted. Keep the idea that he's still begging to be abducted, but no. The worm crashes on Earth, and now Elio has this worm friend, and they need to go on a big adventure to get the worm friend home. All right. Then, while he's doing that, the big bad worm giant mech dad, right, also comes down to Earth to find his worm son that Elio is with, right? That way you can have the villain and you can have this beautiful moment that comes up in this movie as it kind of happens, right? And the reason I say this is then you get to still have the clone storyline and really flesh it out a lot more and sit in that tension more, because I just think there's so much beautiful character writing you could have had there. You know, show the difference in the auntie getting along with this clone for a bit. Lean into that. Lean into Elio's kind of like hurt feelings around that situation, because as it stands, we spend maybe 4 minutes on it. And it's the most interesting part of the movie. I love that section where the hair is crawling back to the clone boy. And look, there's some great gags that happen after the auntie and Elio reunite. There's this moment where the clone is just like, I'm going to self-destruct now, and starts melting horrifically. Good stuff. Like,
Gordon, I am not fireproof!
Why didn't you say something?
Gordon!
Just get in my mouth.
every time this movie is in space, I just think it's kind of really dull space stuff for the most part. So then Elio and his auntie go back up to space, right? And again, I'm like, okay. So they go back up to space, the very dull design space. But then we get this great moment, right? So earlier in the movie, they set up that the dad of the worm creature that is friends with Elio, right? So the dad worm never comes out of his mech suit because their whole thing is being imposing, right? And he wants his son worm to also get in a mech suit that hides their like wormy creature design, you know? Because they want to seem intimidating. It's clearly a commentary on like toxic masculinity, this whole like, you know, this is what we do to keep up appearances, but inside we actually have emotions. That's clearly what it's getting at, but I don't mind an obvious metaphor. I think it's good here. You know, I actually appreciate it. So the most beautiful moment of the movie, everyone's kind of going to agree, is the mech dad, right? The giant worm in the mech suit. eventually confronts his son, finds his son, and the son isn't well. I forget how, but the son is injured, right? And then the worm jumps out of the mech outfit, and which is a big deal. They never do that, right? He shows his vulnerability, jumps out of the mech suit, and nurtures his son worm. Look, it works a lot better in the movie, all right? But it's beautiful. It's beautiful. So you need to keep that in the movie. But as it stands, my big thing with this movie is it reminded me of Mickey 17, but bad. Or not bad, but just not holding together as well. Now, Mickey 17 is a movie that was kind of notorious for most people thinking it was throwing way too much at the wall, right? I appreciated Mickey 17 because it went for 2.5 hours. So I felt like it had ample time to do the clone storyline and then do the creeper storyline. Whereas in this movie, it was this constant roller coaster where I'm like, stay with the clones. Oh, we're back in space, seeing if he can represent Earth in the universe's United Nations, and I just didn't find it as interesting. It left all the human drama behind. And the reason I say that is also, I think the setup had this beautiful storytelling, like I mentioned before, about this boy that is so sad and so isolated after the loss of his parents that he wants to be up in space. He doesn't even want to be on this planet. And that's so interesting, but truthfully, I don't really feel his loss. That's going to sound mean of me, but I didn't need to see the parents die, but I needed some more scenes with it, given the weight it kind of holds on the plot. I think Lilo and Stitch did this a lot better, and this movie is very similar to Lilo and Stitch, but I think this movie needed to either give us more scenes where Elio is clearly not getting along with his auntie, and he's talking about how things used to be different with the parents, whatever. Or just really make us feel this isolation and loneliness. The bullying scenes weren't particularly landing with me. It's not that they weren't awful or brutal, but it just wasn't registering. Like, I didn't think the scenes were particularly well written or landing the way they needed to. So the bullying and the parents, it just needed to be fleshed out a bit more. I really need to feel and care for Elio in the context of these situations. Obviously, a child losing his parents at a young age is objectively sad. The same way the worm scene at the end is objectively gorgeous. But I don't think the movie, past the initial sadness you will have hearing that, did much to make me feel it, and as a result, also there's so many moments where I'm like, I can see what you were going for here. There's this great moment where at the end of the movie he decides his home is at Earth. He decides his home is at Earth with his auntie. He comes back home and they're holding each other's hands, looking off to the stars. There's this voice of a commentator, this voice of a broadcast talking about how we're never truly alone in the universe, while the auntie and Elio hold hands. And it's doubling up, right? It's saying we're not alone in the universe. There's aliens out there, but they're not alone because they've got each other. Again, obvious storytelling, but it works. On top of that, there's some animation stuff I just genuinely didn't particularly like. First off, I remember Soul had an incredible score. This one did not. The music was not doing anything for me, especially I just saw the live action How to Train Your Dragon recently, and that obviously had incredible music. But another thing I didn't love is I thought the human character design was just a bit lame. It looked like DreamWorks extras, and these were main characters. I didn't think they looked good to look at, if that makes any sense. I didn't enjoy them when they were on screen. It was an interesting character design. It actually felt a bit lazy. All the backgrounds and textures were fantastic, but the character designs weren't impressing me. The design of the worm felt like it was just copying the creepers from Mickey 17. I will say, when this movie was leaning into the clone horror stuff, I absolutely loved it. And I wish we got more of that, even on just like a visual level. But there was one character I really couldn't stand. There was this character of this like sweaty, nerdy guy that worked at the army base or the space station, wherever the auntie worked. And he was meant to be kind of like the guy in the chair. He had like a Star Trek shirt on and glasses and like a neck beard. And everyone else had normal Pixar animation for the most part, And then this guy, for some reason, I can't explain it other than he had like TikTok ADHD animation. Like, he was just like, wait, 1 second, we need to go. It was like liquid and gummy and gooey. And I was actually uncomfortable every single time he was on screen. I couldn't stand it. Anyway, so this movie, how do I feel about it? Because I think, truthfully, what I wanted more from the movie was more exploration of the grief, the loneliness, really make us feel it, more exploration of the auntie and his dynamic, more clone stuff. I would have cut the worm stuff entirely with the dad, or I would have made it a story about the worm coming to Earth and running around. I think just as it stands, it felt like it was just shooting in like 7 different directions. So I struggle with this movie because there are ideas here that if they were fleshed out more and we got more time with them, I would have given it like a 4 out of 5, if not a 4.5 out of 5. And I look back on this movie fondly for the big swings it was taking in certain moments, these big kind of reaches it was taking. But at the same time, I think it's a mess. And if I confidently recommended it to someone, I feel like there's a good chance they'd be seeing that being like, really, this? So as a result, it kind of lands at like a 3 out of 5, maybe even a 2.5 out of 5, but I'm going to say a 3 out of 5. I think it's good. I think kids will love it for the most part, if not getting a little bored at times. I think adults will probably be feeling the same way I am, where they'll just go, oh, that was cool. Oh, I'm a bit bored. Oh, that was cool. I'm a bit bored. So that's Elio. I haven't seen anyone actually talk about this movie and its interesting plot beats and its interesting character moments, you know? Like, I've seen people just basically being like, yeah, it's a pretty good Pixar movie, which is nice because Pixar hasn't been good lately, the end. So I wanted to offer some more thoughts and more story. It reminded me a lot of Mickey 17. I have the collector's edition steelbook, but no, it reminded me a lot of Mickey 17 in the sense that with Mickey 17, that movie started in one direction with the clones, went a completely different direction with the creepers, and I was kind of like, oh, I wish we got a bit more with the clones, but I'm also really liking the creepers, so I wish we got more with the creepers, and I wish we got more with Mark Ruffalo, and that felt like a mini-series in a movie, but I think Mickey 17 pulled the balance off a bit better, came out to about a 7 or an 8 out of 10, you know, whereas this comes out to about a 6. I think this one falls apart under the weight of all its interesting ideas. I think Mickey 17 just barely scrapes through because it somewhat comes together at the end. So if you liked Elio, check out Mickey 17. If you're a big science fiction fan, it might actually be worth seeing Elio just because there's so many interesting parallels to fun science fiction movies. Annihilation with the whole clone stuff, right? Like, genuinely, it reminded me of Alex Garland's horrifying science fiction film. It reminded me of Ex Machina. It reminded me of Futurama. It reminded me of First Man with Ryan Gosling. It reminded me of Ad Astra. These are all it reminded me a lot of Mickey 17. But this is all high praise stuff. These are great things to be compared to. You know, and I just wish it went more hardcore with it, better storytelling. Because my big frustration here, guys, and what I'm probably going to title the video, and I wish I said it earlier in this video, is I actually think there is a masterpiece Pixar film hidden inside Elio. You know, it needs a re-edit, it needs a rewrite, it needs a restructuring. But I will say, I didn't know anything about who made this movie, who wrote this movie, nothing. And when the credits pulled up and there were like 2 directors, I went, makes sense. Makes sense. And thank you so much for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed. If you like this, please like, comment, and subscribe. Also, I offer memberships to this channel. There are links below for both Patreon and YouTube memberships. Every 2 weeks, I do a podcast talk about every single thing I watched. This includes shows, movies, anything I see on like musicals or anything, books, anything else, you know, but mostly movies and shows, obviously. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. Have a lovely day. Elio forever.